So my screen is visible, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So today we'll be starting a new topic that is about Ingress. Okay. Then after that we'll learn about Metal LB as well, and how to integrate Metal LB or load balancer with Ingress. All those things we'll be learning. So let's recap, do some recap for services in Kubernetes. So we have three types of services. We have four actually, but the external IP were rarely used. So one is the cluster IP. Okay, so the service here means it is the cluster IP. So what happens is whenever the request comes to the cluster IP, it is forwarded to the pod. Okay, and it is limited within the cluster, the service for cluster IP. Then we have a node port. So here also the service is cluster IP itself, but a port is open on the all the nodes. In our case we have only one node. Okay, so the port is open and the service is available on that particular port. Okay, that happens in a node port. And what happens in a load balancer, there will be a cluster IP service here. Okay, but there will be one more IP address, that is a load balancer IP address, which will forward the request to cluster IP, and cluster IP will forward the request to the pods. Okay, so these three services we have in Kubernetes. Okay, so suppose the node port is not recommended because it exposes our worker node to the outside world, and that is not recommended. And cluster IP has limitations that it cannot be accessed outside the cluster. Okay, and load balancer is the perfect choice, but in production when we deploy it in the cloud, okay, so there will be, for each load balancer there will be a public IP address. Okay, so suppose there are 10 applications, then the 10 load balancer IPs will be required. Okay, so what is the solution? So solution would be Ingress with the load balancer. Okay, so the Ingress will be having the load balancer, but the first exercise which we will see will be without load balancer, and the other one will be Ingress plus load balancer. So what happens in Ingress is we'll be creating the Ingress. Okay, so the traffic will come to the Ingress controller. Okay, then there we have defined the rule that whenever the request come to foo.mydomain.com, it will forward the request to this particular service. Similarly, the other two services are also routed based on the rules defined in the Ingress. Okay, so this Ingress configuration will be seeing, and when we do some practicals it will be more clear. Okay, so again a small recap for the services. So what are the service and why we need there is a need for a service. Suppose there are two pods, the my app and DB. Okay, so both the pods, okay, are ephemeral in nature. So whatever IP address it has, it will be lost. Okay, so after the restart, that's why there is a need for a service. See here, there is a service. Okay, the IP, that is a kind of a virtual network which we create. Okay, and the service or the IP address which is given to the service will not change. Okay, so then we have one more ingress. And what happens in Ingress is we define some rules that whenever the request comes to myapp.com, it will be forwarded to a particular service. It will be either myapp or DB depending on whatever rules which we have defined. Okay, and generally DB is not exposed, just there is a connection between app and DB. That's just a best practice. So this we have seen. So whenever we use the term ingress, ingress means it will be setting some routing rules for external traffic to the cluster service in the Kubernetes. Okay, so why is ingress required? It was required for exposing the service outside. Otherwise they will be accessible within the cluster only. So this is the scenario which we are going to achieve in the next two exercises. So what will happen is client will make a request, it will go to the load balancer. Okay, so we'll be creating a load balancer with service for ingress. How will I'll let you know. So the request will come to a load balancer, then it will check the routing rules. Okay, based on the routing rule, it will be forwarded to a particular service, and that service will forward it to the pods. Okay, so the same thing here, I've explained this already. So this is how the configuration will look like. So we'll be having a deployment called nginx. Okay, so we have defined a label here, nginx. Okay, and we are selecting it. So for this deployment we have a service, and as the type is not defined here, it will by default be a cluster IP. Okay, now this my service, okay, for that my service we'll be creating some rules. So here we are calling that service, that for this service means whenever the request come to foo.bar.com/foo, okay, forward that request to this particular service. So these routing rules will be set in the ingress. Similarly for a bar/bar, some other service, that other service is not listed here. So this is how the flow works. Okay, so the request will come, it will go to that my service, and that service will forward it to a pod. Okay, so this is what we'll be going to achieve today. So let's start the exercise, then it will